The plywood walls of the operations tent still smelled like diesel and unwashed bodies when Senior Chief Wade Kerrigan looked across the table at the small woman in marine camis and laughed. "You're telling me," he said, loud enough that the rest of the platoon could hear, loud enough that the air conditioner cutting in and out couldn't smother him. "They sent us a 5'3" Marine to babysit our flank. What's she gonna do, Sergeant? Throw rocks?" 3 SEALs at the back of the tent laughed. One of them whistled. The platoon's youngest operator, a kid named Carnes, looked down at his boots because he hadn't decided yet who he was going to be in this Navy. Sergeant Wren Halloran did not laugh. She did not blink. She did not adjust her stance or shift her weight from one boot to the other. She kept her hands on her hips the way her grandfather had taught her to stand when a man wanted to make her smaller. Chest open, chin level, weight back. Her eyes did one thing only. They moved across the room exactly once, marking faces, marking who laughed and who didn't, marking the SEAL chief who said it and the captain in the corner who said nothing. Then she went still. A SEAL who had done this work long enough would have read that stillness and understood it. Kerrigan was not that SEAL today. He was performing for his platoon, the way men sometimes do, when they suspect that the future is about to ask them a question they don't have an answer for. "Sergeant," he said, smiling without warmth, "you sure you're in the right tent? Mess is 2 over." She didn't answer. She looked at him for 2 full seconds. Then she said quietly, "The way you set down a thing you don't want to break." "I'll be on the ridge." That was all. 5 words. The kind of sentence that doesn't sound like anything until later, when it sounds like everything. She would be on the ridge before any of them. She would be on it before the first hostile took a knee in the riverbed below. She would be on it before Kerrigan's radio came alive at 0231 with a voice he was about to recognize and a fear he would carry with him for the rest of his life. She already knew something they would spend the next 4 hours of their lives trying to forget. If you've never heard this story before, do yourself a favor and stay with me. Hit the subscribe button so the algorithm knows to find you the next one. Drop the city you're listening from in the comments. I want to see how far this thing travels. And stay through to the end, because there's a moment in the back of a medevac wadi that I haven't been able to stop thinking about since I first heard it, where a wounded 22-year-old asks a question, and a sergeant who has not raised her voice once in this entire story answers in 3 words that mean more by the time she says them than anything anyone else has said all night. Now back to the ridge. It was eastern Syria, late September, and the heat had started doing what it did at that season, letting go of the day in slow, reluctant breaths and pulling the cold up out of the ground in its place. The forward operating base sat in a bowl between 2 ridgelines that had been mountains once, before the wind and the war had filed them down to bare ribs of rock and scree. The base had no name on any open map. The Marines and the sailors and the contract pilots who came through it called it patch, because that's what it was, a patch of dirt that someone with a budget had decided was important enough to fence, and the fence had become a perimeter, and the perimeter had become a place. The kind of place where you didn't notice the smell of diesel and human salt anymore until you left for a week and came back, and then it hit you in the throat like a fist. Halloran had been at Patch for 19 days when the SEAL platoon flew in. She had not been told they were coming. The colonel running the Joint Task Force had been told, and the captain commanding the operations cell had been told. But Halloran had been told the way she was told most things at Patch, which was that she had walked into the chow tent one evening and seen 6 new beards at a table that hadn't existed the day before. That was how the Navy arrived, loud, hungry, and certain. What Kerrigan had not bothered to read, because the file folder had landed on his desk after a 15-hour flight, and he was the kind of tired where you trust your eyes about people instead of paper, was that the small Marine sergeant attached to his element for the next 48 hours had done the Marine Scout Sniper course at Quantico 3 years ago and finished it first in her class. She had done it again as an instructor 18 months later. She had 3 deployments, 2 of them classified deeply enough that the colonel who had requested her by name had needed to make a phone call to even read the cover sheet. She had a confirmed kill at 1,440 meters from a hide she had spent 31 hours building, and she had a quiet commendation from a man in Tampa whose name nobody at Patch had clearance to know. She had also had a grandfather, Marine, 2 tours in Vietnam, Scout Sniper with a Winchester Model 70, and the kind of patience that made other patient men feel jumpy. He had taught her 3 things, and only 3, and he had made her say them back to him every Sunday from the time she was 8 years old until the morning he died. Breathe out before you mean it. Stillness first. The shot is the smallest part. She had said them to herself, walking out of the operations tent at Patch with Kerrigan's laughter still hanging behind her in the diesel air. She had said them quietly, the way you say a prayer you're not sure anyone is listening to. Stillness first. The morning of the operation, Halloran was not on the list for the planning meeting. She had read the warning order, drawn her own conclusions, and walked over to the ops tent. At the time, the meeting was scheduled because it had not occurred to her that anyone would actively keep her out. A lieutenant at the door, young, with bad acne and a clipboard he hadn't earned, told her the meeting was for the SEAL element and the J3 only, and that she could pick up her tasking from her own command, ma'am. He said ma'am, the way you say it when you've decided it doesn't apply. She did not argue. She walked back across the gravel to the support tent where Corporal Imani Sawyer was finishing the cleaning of Halloran's rifle the way Halloran had taught her, slow, exact, the bolt face like a clock she was setting. Sawyer was 23 from Detroit and had attached herself to Halloran the way some young Marines attach themselves to an older one when they recognize, before they can articulate it, that the older Marine is what they want to become. "They kick you out again?" Sawyer asked without looking up. "They didn't let me in," Halloran said. "What's the difference?" "Less of my time wasted walking back." Sawyer almost smiled. She did not. She seated the bolt and ran a finger along the receiver, and after a moment she said, "Master Sergeant Hollins told me this morning I was attached to a sniper team for the experience, but I shouldn't expect to spot the actual shoot. Said he'd find me a real assignment when this was over." She set the rag down, said it nice, like he was doing me a favor. Halloran looked at her. "What did you say?" "I said yes, Master Sergeant." "Good. Good. Today you'll be spotting the actual shoot. Tomorrow he'll know." Outside the support tent, a young sailor in coveralls was hauling water cans across the dirt to the pilot's billet. His name was Seaman Tomas Quintero. He was 19 and 3 months out of Great Lakes, and he had not yet, in his short and overwhelmed military life, learned to look at a Marine sergeant the way you were supposed to look at a Marine sergeant. He looked at her like a person. He stopped, set the water cans down, and said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, your rifle. Is that the long one? The one I keep hearing about?" Halloran looked up from her gear. She did not answer immediately. She rarely answered immediately. "It's a rifle," she said. "It's the biggest one I've seen," Quintero said earnestly. "That's because most rifles aren't that big." Quintero nodded, as if she had explained physics to him. Then he picked up his water cans and continued his journey across the gravel, and at no point in the next 8 minutes did it occur to him that he had just spoken to the woman who was going to save his platoon's life. The convoy was supposed to be routine. The SEAL platoon was running a vehicle interdiction on a wadi crossing 11 kilometers north of Patch, a checkpoint for couriers moving along the river road. Halloran's tasking, the one she'd received from her own command and not from Kerrigan, was overwatch from a ridge designated Falcon 2, a long spine of broken rock running parallel to the wadi at a slant offset of 200 meters. She and Sawyer had inserted at 2,200 the previous night, on foot, carrying 90 pounds of equipment apiece across 4 kilometers of unforgiving ground. By 0100 they were in their hide. By 0145 they had ranged every meaningful piece of terrain between the wadi and the ridge across from them. Hyena Ridge, the SEAL element had called it on the map, because someone in the planning cell with a thesaurus had decided that's what hyenas looked like. At 0230, Halloran put her cheek to her rifle for the 7th time and looked through her optic at the wadi where the SEAL trucks were idling, and she saw, with the absolute clarity of starlight, through a Night Force A TACR, the first 2 men come over the spine of Hyena Ridge with rifles at low ready. She keyed her radio. "All elements, this is Falcon 2. Contact, Hyena Ridge, North Spur, 2 armed men descending. Stand by for count." There was a half-second of dead air on the platoon channel. The half-second it takes a tactical operations center to register that the voice it just heard does not belong to anyone in the planning cell. Then Kerrigan's voice came back. "Falcon 2, say again." She said it again. Same words, same pitch. Clinical, unadorned. The kind of transmission you only get from someone who has been on a radio under pressure many, many times before. 6 counts of armed men were now descending the spur. She gave the count without changing her tone. And another 4 were moving along the wadi bed from the east. They were not pickup truck and yelling fighters. They were moving in pairs, with overlapping fields of fire, with weapons up and shouldered. They had come to take a SEAL platoon apart. Kerrigan keyed his mic. "Roger, Falcon 2, stay off the net unless engaged." Halloran did not respond. She did not need to. 3 seconds later, one of the men on Hyena Ridge raised an RPG to his shoulder, and Halloran's grandfather said, plainly and clearly in her head, as if he were lying in the dirt next to her, "Stillness first." She fired. The rifle was a Mark 22 in .338 Norma, suppressed, and at 610 meters, the report came back to her as a low thump rather than a crack, a sound that traveled through the rock more than the air. The man on Hyena Ridge with the RPG dropped where he stood. The tube tipped sideways as he fell and clattered down the slope. The man next to him, the loader, the one carrying the spare round, turned to look at his partner, and Halloran shot him in the throat before he had finished turning. 2 seconds, 2 men. Falcon 2, engaging, she said into the radio. Targets on Hyena Ridge. Recommend SEAL element take cover. Vehicles south. She could hear Kerrigan over the net now ordering his trucks to displace, and she could hear, through the half-kilometer of air between her hide and the wadi, the soft mechanical thunder of Humvees, changing gears at the same instant. She was killing the third man. He had been crouched behind a rock, looking at his radio. She put 1 round through the radio, and the man behind it, 2 for the price of 1, and the round buried itself in the back wall of the wadi with a small puff of dust. Sawyer's voice in her ear, calm, professional. Wind picking up, quartering, right to left, 12 knots and rising. Range to wadi center, 680. Range to far rim, 810. Send it. Sent. Halloran shifted to her secondary firing position, 3 meters to the right, behind a different fold of rock, because the muzzle flash, suppressed or not, had a signature you only got to use once. She slid the bipod into the second seat she had carved into the dirt at 0:30 that morning. By the time the 4th man on the ridge had figured out where she was firing from, she was not firing from there anymore. The 4th man fired anyway. A burst of 7.62 walked across the rocks where her hide had been 10 seconds earlier, and the chips of stone spattered against her left cheek and into her hair. And the air above her hummed with the small, ugly sound of rounds that had not quite found her. This was the first thing that nearly killed her. She did not think about it. There was not time. She turned her head, slowly, the way she had been taught, and tracked the 4th man through her optic. He was a professional. He had broken cover after his burst and was already moving down the slope toward a better position. The wind pushed her bipod a 1/4 inch left, and she let it. She put the reticle on his second step and waited for his third, and her grandfather's voice was steady in her head. Breathe out before you mean it. She did. She heard her own pulse in her ears, and underneath it the cracking of the SEAL Elements machine gun a kilometer away, the chatter of it bouncing off the wadi walls, and underneath that the wind itself moving through the rocks like a slow river. The shot landed in the man's shoulder and tumbled through his chest cavity at a brutal angle. He went down sideways and did not get up. 4. Below her, in the wadi, the SEALs had the vehicles moving now. She could see the trucks rolling south in a tight column, tail lights doused, drivers running blackout under night vision. The hostile element on the wadi floor had figured out by now that the trucks were moving, and they were moving too, trying to flank. 6 of them. Halloran spoke into the radio. SEAL element, 6 tangos in the wadi, paralleling your south displacement, 200 meters east of your column. Roger, Falcon 2. It was Kerrigan again. He sounded different now, not friendly, just different. A man absorbing information. She shot the first of the wadi 6 at 680 meters, the second at 710, and the third? She had to lead him hard because he was sprinting at 620. 3 rounds, 3 men, 4 seconds. The brass tinked softly on the rock behind her. 3 small bell notes in the dark. The 4th, 5th, and 6th went prone behind a low gravel berm in the wadi and started returning fire blindly, which was the only thing they could do because they did not know where she was. 5, 6, 7, Sawyer said quietly, marking the count. Now the rest of the men on Hyena Ridge were oriented. There had been 6 visible from her position. 2 more had appeared from over the spine. Call it 8. And a 9th and 10th were now moving up the back side of the ridge in a wide arc, trying to come around the high ground and onto her elevation. She marked them. Sawyer, I see them. Designate. Got it. Sawyer thumbed the IR designator and began painting the back side of Hyena Ridge in pulsed infrared. For a Reaper, Halloran did not have time to look up at. Sawyer had not been told she had control of the Reaper. She had inferred it, because she had listened to Halloran's pre-mission brief the way Halloran had told her to listen to everything. Like every word might be the one that saved her. Reaper to Falcon 2, I have your sparkle. 10 seconds. Cleared hot, Sawyer said, before the question was asked, in the voice of a corporal who had decided, for the next 90 seconds, to be exactly the operator she was going to be. The hellfire came in from the east. The sound rolled across the wadi and back like a slow second of weather, and the seals in the trucks below felt it in the floorboards before they heard it. The men on the back side of Hyena Ridge stopped being men. Halloran went back to her optic. The Wadi 6 were now Wadi 3, and the 3 were now moving north along the berm. They were going to try to climb the Wadi wall and disappear into the rocks on the far side. She let them get to the wall. She wanted them committed, because climbing men cannot shoot back. The first was halfway up when she took him. He fell into the second man, and they both rolled back into the wadi bed in a tangle, and she took the second man on the ground. 10, 11. The third disappeared into a fold of rock, and she could not get him. She would deal with him later. What she did not see, what Sawyer did not see, what neither of them could have seen because they were oriented to the wadi and to Hyena Ridge, was that 15 minutes earlier, long before Halloran's first shot, a counter-sniper team of 2 men had begun moving along the parallel ridge to her south. They were professionals. They had been brought to this fight specifically for what Halloran had just demonstrated. The first round hit the rock 6 inches from her left shoulder. She heard it the way you hear a bee that has decided you are the problem. Close, ugly, personal. The rock above her head spat dust into her optic, and she lost her sight picture for 1 full second. And in that second, a second round took her empty canteen on the back of her ruck and went straight through it and out the other side. And the water she had been saving for the long walk back hit the dirt with the soft, surprised sound of something giving up. This was the second thing that nearly killed her. She rolled, hard left, 2 body widths, into a depression in the rock she had identified at 0045 and not yet used. Sawyer rolled with her, mirror image, no order necessary. They were now lying behind a fin of rock, perhaps 8 inches tall, and a third round took the top off the fin and threw fragments across both of their faces. Sawyer was bleeding from her right cheek. Halloran could feel her own face wet and did not look at it. She felt the cold of the ground through her elbows. She felt the heat of her own breathing against her hands. She heard the 4th round whine off the rock above her, at an angle that told her where the shooter was, even before Sawyer spoke. "South Ridge," Sawyer said, not panicking. "2 shooters. I have a muzzle flash signature. 3 o'clock from our hide, elevation matches, range estimate 1150. Halloran did not move. She breathed. She listened. She let her hands settle. 1150 was a long way. Across a wind that had now grown to 15 knots, gusting, with a thermal layer beginning to set up between the cooler riverbed and the warmer ridges. It was the kind of shot you took in a competition if you wanted to win, and in a war if you wanted to live. She thought about the shot. She thought about her grandfather. She thought about the fact that the two counter-snipers had a fixed firing solution on her position, and that the next round was going to be a hit. She made a decision. She moved up, fast, to a third firing position she had carved into the dirt and had not used, 8 meters higher and farther back from the original hide. The move took her 4 full seconds of exposure. 2 rounds chased her. Neither caught her. She slid into the new position, settled the bipod, and Sawyer was already calling the wind. 12 knots, quartering, range 1180, dope plus 4.2. Halloran spun her elevation turret. She did not check her work. There was no time to check her work. She found the south ridge in her optic and saw for 1/4 of 1 second the shape of a man rising slightly to look for her. She fired. The round traveled 1,180 meters across 2 ridgelines of cooling Syrian rock at a velocity of 870 meters per second, and at the end of its flight it found the head of a man who had been very good at his job for a very long time. She did not see the second counter-sniper. She heard him scrambling, the soft scrape of boots on scree, panicked, no longer professional. She tracked the sound. He broke cover at the top of the south ridge, running, and she shot him in the back at 1,210 meters. 12, 13. Falcon 2, this is Mako 1. Kerrigan's voice. We have wounded. We have wounded in the lead vehicle. I need eyes on the ridge above us. I have armed men I can't see. There was a pause. She could hear him breathing into the mic. She could hear, through the radio, what he was about to ask, and she could hear what it was costing him. 2 SEALs were within earshot of his mic. The young one, Karnes, was one of them. The older one was a chief whose name she did not know. Both of them heard everything. Both of them went very still. Kerrigan keyed the mic. Sergeant Halloran. He said her name. The radio made it sound like a confession. The men around him heard the way he said it. They would carry the way he said it home with them. I need your eyes. I need you to talk me through this ridge. She was already talking him through it before he finished. She gave him every position. She gave him every angle. She gave him the man she hadn't killed earlier, who was still in the fold of rock, and she walked the SEAL Element's grenadier onto him with 3 sentences and a corrected range. The grenadier put a 40 millimeter into the rock fold, and the man inside it stopped being a problem. She gave them the spur. She gave them the high ground above the spur. She gave them 4 more hostiles, approaching from the north, along an unimproved goat track. She had ranged the night before because her grandfather had once told her that the most important thing about Overwatch was the path no one else thought to look at. Mako 3 to Mako 1. I can't reach Karnes. Karnes is... I can't get him on the net. Karnes. Karnes. Karnes, this is Mako 1. Respond. Silence on the channel. Karnes. Respond. Silence. The kind of silence that you feel in your stomach before you feel anywhere else. The kind that takes the air out of a radio for 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4. Sawyer's hand found Halloran's elbow in the dark. Halloran did not look at her. She was already counting in her head, the way she counted when she didn't want to feel a thing yet. Mako 1, Falcon 2. I see Karnas. He's down behind the lead Humvee. He's moving. Not much, but he's moving. A long breath. Then Kerrigan's voice, lower than before. Roger, Falcon 2. Halloran fired 3 more times in the next 90 seconds. The 14th, 15th, and 16th fell along the goat track. By the time the 17th came over the ridge, Sawyer had brought the second Hellfire down on the cluster behind him, and the 17th ceased to exist, along with the 18th and 19th. Halloran took the 20th, the 21st, and the 22nd as they tried to break contact and run south. The remainder withdrew up a draw she could not see into. Sawyer began to track them with the laser. Halloran put a hand on her wrist. Let them tell the story, she said. 22 confirmed by rifle, 8 more by air, 30. She keyed her radio one last time. Mako 1, Falcon 2, engagement complete. She did not stay on the ridge. She slung her rifle across her back, kissed Sawyer on the forehead, the way her grandfather had once kissed her on the forehead before her first deployment, and went down the slope with her medical ruck in her hand. The slope was loose and steep, and she did not slow. She had a corpsman somewhere in the SEAL element, but the corpsman was treating 2 other wounded, and she was not going to make Petty Officer Eli Carney's wait. She found him behind the lead Humvee, in the dirt, in the dark, with Kerrigan kneeling over him, pressing his palms into a wound high on Carnes's thigh that was bleeding the way wounds bleed when they have found something important. Kerrigan looked up at her when she came around the truck. His face was pale, and his hands were red to the wrist, and he said nothing. She put a hand on his shoulder. Move, she said. He moved. She opened her medical ruck and pulled a tourniquet that had been issued to her in Tampa by a man with no nameplate. She set it 2 inches above the wound, cranked it tight in 3 steady turns, and the bleeding stopped the way bleeding stops when you know what you are doing. She packed the wound. She started a 14 gauge in his left antecubital. She hung the bag of crystalloid on the wing mirror of the Humvee and squeezed the line by hand because she did not want to wait for a stand. Carnes was looking at her. He was 22 years old. He had a sister at Penn State who was studying nursing, and a mother in Pittsburgh who had told him before he deployed that she was going to keep his old room exactly the way it was until he came home. He was pale and shaking, and his lips were already going blue around the edges, and he asked her, in a voice he had to find, the question she knew he was going to ask. Sergeant, am I dying? She looked at him. She put her hand against the side of his face, the way you would touch a child you loved who had been frightened by something he did not yet understand. Not tonight, she said. 3 words. Simple. Absolute. The kind of promise a person makes when she has already done the math and knows the answer. He cried a little, the way men cry when they have not been allowed to before. She did not look away. She held the IV line in her left hand, and her right hand stayed against his face, and she counted his breathing, 24, 22, 20, until the bird came in over the southern ridge, and the rotor wash filled the wadi with the smell of jet fuel and dust, and she helped lift him onto the litter and walked beside him to the helicopter with her hand on his shoulder the whole way. He went home. He kept his old room. It was 4 days before they were all back at Patch in the same operations tent, with the same plywood walls and the same air conditioner cutting in and out, and the same diesel smell that had not changed and would not change for the rest of the war. Kerrigan was waiting for her. The platoon was there. Sawyer was there. The captain who had said nothing on the first day, Lieutenant Commander Theo Ashford, was there, standing at the back, with his hands behind him and his eyes on the floor. The young Marine lieutenant, with the bad acne who had blocked her from the planning meeting, was there. The young sailor with the water cans was there too, because someone had told him he should be. Kerrigan stood up when she came in. The SEALs around the table noticed. There was a long second of him not knowing how to begin. He began. "Sergeant Halloran." His voice did not boom. It did not perform. It came out smaller than anyone in that tent had ever heard it. I was wrong." He stopped. He looked at his hands. He was a man who used his hands when he talked, and he could not figure out, right now, what to do with them. He set them on the table, palms down, flat, as if he were anchoring himself to it. "I was wrong about you the second I walked into this tent 4 days ago. I was wrong about you in front of my platoon. I was wrong loud, and I was wrong in public, and I was wrong on the record. And I was wrong about more than tactics. I have been wrong about people like you my whole career." He swallowed. The cords in his neck stood out. The tent was quiet enough to hear the air conditioner trying. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't want that from you. I don't think I'd get to want that. I just want it said, in this tent, in front of these men, that I was wrong, that I owe my platoon to you, that I owe Eli Carness to you." He didn't look at her when he said it. He looked at the table. The silence in the tent stretched. Halloran took 2 steps forward. She set her cover on the table. She looked at Kerrigan for what was, by Sawyer's count later, 6.5 seconds. Then she said, "It's said." 2 words. She picked up her cover. She did not say anything else. Ashford hadn't moved during the apology. He stood with his hands behind him and his eyes on the floor, and he had heard every word the way a man hears a thing he has already been preparing for, in private, for 4 days. When Kerrigan finished, Ashford did not speak immediately. He walked to the back wall of the tent. He stared at the wall. He put one hand against the plywood as if he needed it to hold him up for a minute. He closed his eyes. He stood there for what Sawyer counted as 11 seconds. Then he turned. Then, deliberately, he pulled a folding chair out from the wall and sat down on it, so that he was below her eye level, and he looked up at her from there. "Sergeant Halloran," he said. "Sir." "I had your file on my desk the day you arrived. I never opened it. I let Senior Chief Kerrigan run his platoon his way, because that's what officers in my position have always done with senior chiefs. I let a young lieutenant decide who got into my planning meetings because I did not want to spend the political capital of overruling him. I let a Marine sergeant with a record I now realize I should have been honored to read, stand alone in this tent 4 days ago while a man under my command made jokes at her expense, and I said nothing. This is on me. This is on all of us. But it is on me first." He stood up. He walked across the tent to her. He extended his hand. She took it. He held it. He looked her in the eye. He said, "I see you, Sergeant." 4 words. He did not let go of her hand for a second longer than the handshake should have lasted. Then he did. He stepped back. He walked out of the tent without saying anything else, because there was nothing else to say. 2 weeks later, Kerrigan was in the Chow tent at Patch, when a young SEAL from a different platoon, one who had heard the story and decided to make a joke of it because he was 24 and stupid, said something across the table about the Marine girl who'd babysat Mako platoon's flank. Kerrigan stood up. He did not raise his voice. He did not slam anything. He walked around the table and stood next to the young SEAL, looking down at him, and he said in the same quiet voice he had used in the operations tent 4 days after the engagement, "You will not say her name in this tent unless it is to thank her. You will not say her name in this base unless it is to learn from her. You will not say her name in this Navy unless it is the way you would say the name of a man you owe your life to. And if I hear you make a joke about Sergeant Halloran one more time, I will personally walk you off this base on foot, and you can find your own ride home from Erbil. Do you understand me?" The young SEAL understood him. Kerrigan sat back down. He finished his meal. He did not look up. He did not need to. Sawyer, who had heard all of this from 2 tables over, walked it back to Halloran in the support tent that evening, in detail, with the satisfaction of someone watching the world bend slowly into a shape she had always known it could be. Halloran nodded once and went back to cleaning her rifle. The young sailor with the water cans, Tomas Quintero, saw her in the chow line a week after that. He stood in front of her with his tray balanced on the heels of his hands, and he looked at her the way he had not known how to look at her the first time, when he had asked her about her rifle. "Ma'am," he said, "seaman." He could not figure out how to say the thing he wanted to say. He tried. He failed. He tried again. He finally settled on something simple, the way 19-year-olds settle on simple things when they cannot find the elaborate ones. "You saved all of us, ma'am." Halloran looked at him. She did not correct him, though she could have, because she hadn't saved all of them, and she knew the names of the ones who hadn't come home. She let the boy have the sentence he needed. "Eat your dinner, seaman." He nodded. He moved down the line. She walked her tray to a table in the back of the chow tent and sat down across from Sawyer, who was already eating. Sawyer slid the salt across the table without looking up. Halloran took it. They ate in the particular silence of 2 people who did not need to speak in order to be in the same room. After a while, Sawyer said, "You ever going to tell me what your grandfather said to you? The thing you say to yourself?" Halloran thought about it. Outside the tent, the desert wind had started up again. The cold one. The one that came down off the ridges at night and pulled the heat out of the day. Somewhere on the other side of the base, a generator coughed and caught. Somewhere a Humvee shifted into gear and rolled toward the gate. "He said 3 things," Halloran said. "What were they?" "Breathe out before you mean it. Stillness first. The shot is the smallest part." Sawyer chewed slowly. She thought about it. She said, eventually, "What does the last one mean?" Halloran looked at her. The faintest warmth moved behind her eyes. The only time Sawyer would ever see it there. The only time anyone at Patch ever would. "It means the rifle is the easiest thing. The hard part is who you are when nothing about you depends on it." Sawyer nodded. She did not say anything else. She didn't need to. The next morning, Halloran was up before any of them, the way she was always up before any of them. She walked across the gravel in the gray pre-dawn cold, with her rifle slung and her ruck on, and she passed Kerrigan coming the other way from the operations tent. He stopped. She stopped. He nodded at her. Once. the smallest motion. She nodded back. The same motion, the same weight. Then they walked past each other, two people now, neither one carrying anything the other one owed. And Halloran kept going toward the ridge she had work to do on, the way she had always kept going, the way her grandfather had taught her to keep going when he was alive, and the way she still kept going now that he was not. Quiet, level-eyed, exactly herself, exactly where she was supposed to be.